Are you the fanatic we're looking for? Welcome to the Mrs. R Relevant Daily Draft Podcast, brought to you by the Draft Professor. The Draft Professor is the only interactive and dynamic mock draft simulator. Dynamic means that the picks from one mock draft will influence the players that team selects in the next mock draft. This can be done with a first-round challenge. This can be done with a second-round challenge. This will be done with any mock draft from the Draft Professor. In addition, the Draft Professor has rank players functionality, allowing you to rank players and build your own big board and then compare your board to that of other users at the Draft Professor. In addition, the Draft Professor has draft a team functionality. This allows 2 or more users to snake draft a team of 22 players from the rookie pool, and then you can debate which players you like at which position and why. Thank you for tuning in to this podcast. This episode will begin shortly. Well, welcome to this episode of the Mrs. R Relevant Daily Draft Podcast. My name's Jim. And what we're going to do in this podcast is we're going to go over the teams that are 17 through 24 in the draft order and talk about which players could possibly go in round 1 at that spot. So if you want to see teams 1 through 8 in the draft order, that was a podcast I did about an hour and a half ago. And then if you want to see teams 9 through 16, that was a podcast that was about 45 minutes ago. Those are both available on YouTube. This episode is specifically going to focus on the Draft Professor mock draft simulator and the teams that are 17 through 24. And what makes this section of the first round unique is that most of these players are not going to be first round grades. So the variation of players that we're going to talk about from 17 to 24 is significant here. So we're going to start with Atlanta. We're going to do this thing called a first round challenge right here. Okay. And a first round challenge is 5 unique 1-round drafts. So it's basically using the algorithm to give you, each mock will be different. And then we'll talk about, let's say, some of the players that are available. So the players that went immediately before the Falcons pick include Starks, Genty, Grant, Campbell, Scout. Okay. So in talk, I want to give a shout out to Clint. So I know Clint likes Jihad Campbell to the Falcons. So we're going to go with Campbell in round 1 to the Falcons. Now it's immediately taking us to the second mock draft. And what the simulator makes sure happens is that Campbell goes before the Falcons pick. So would the Falcons take Ashton Genty? I don't think so. I think they would go edge. I think Clint has said he likes Pierce and Stewart. So we're going to go with Pierce over Genty and observe that Pierce is currently ranked 11th on the Falcons board. Okay, so every team on this simulator has their own player board. So if this is the board, I think they would go Scourton over Genty. And Scourton was 10th on the draft board at the time that I picked him. Okay, so now this becomes, let's say, a little bit more tricky. Would you do Xavier Watts in round 1? Okay, so I know that the Falcons need a safety. Okay, I don't think Watts lasts until round 2 to Atlanta. So I am going to start a Xavier Watts. He's currently 51 on the board. I'm picking him in round 1 to Atlanta. Okay, so there's definitely a discussion there as to, do you have a true first round grade on Watts? If he is one of the first round grades, I think you need to talk about that. And then another player to talk about for the Falcons in round 1 is Malachi Starks. And again, he's currently 12th on the Falcons draft board, and Genty is 11th. Okay. So I believe I've just done 5. So that was Campbell, Pierce. So Jihad Campbell from Alabama, James Pierce Jr. from Tennessee, Nick Scourton from Texas A&M, Xavier Watts from Notre Dame, Malachi Starks from Georgia. So if we come to the team needs section of the website, so if you go to team needs, scroll down and find Atlanta and look at their player list. Okay, and what you're going to see, you can see Jalen Walker is pretty high. Okay, you can see Campbell is 7th. You can see Scourton, Pierce, and Starks are all higher than Ashton Genty. Okay, so Genty, I think, started at 9, and like with each mock, he just kind of moved down a spot on the board. So this is what we mean by an interactive or dynamic mock draft simulator. The players I picked, each of these moved up the board. And let's take a look at where Xavier Watts is. So let's look at safeties. And Xavier Watts is 38th. I think he was 56th at the time that I picked him. So for him to get into, let's say, the top 10 of the board, more people would have to pick Watts to Atlanta round 1. So I've started it, but picking somebody once isn't going to take them all the way to the top of the draft card, especially in round 1. You may see that in round 7, but you're not going to see that in round 1. Okay, so let's go and download that graphic and go to the next team. So we're going to do a first round challenge. This button right here. Okay. And the next team in the draft order is Seattle. Okay, so Seattle, my opinion, is that they need some defensive line and offensive line help. And you can see Campbell is going to Atlanta. That was a player that I had picked to them. Would Seattle go Milroe? I'm going to say not yet, because there's still some players who I would probably take before Milroe at this spot. So one of the players is Kelvin Banks. Seattle needs offensive line help. The question is guard or tackle. So if you've graded Banks as a tackle, I think that's what Seattle needs as opposed to a guard. So I'm going to go with Banks, and I'm going to give a shout out to at least one more tackle in this spot. Okay, so the question would be Simmons or Connerly. Some people have Connerly higher. Some people have Simmons higher. I think more people have Simmons as offensive tackle 3 in this class. Not a true first round grade, but it's worth a discussion. So I'm going to go with Simmons. And then I saw one other player that likely has a first round grade that would need to be talked about. Okay, I don't think Genty would go to Seattle because Seattle already has invested 2 second or third round picks and running backs on the roster. But Colston Loveland is going to be really close to a first round grade on most boards. And I believe Seattle needs a tight end. So I think that would actually be a pretty good pick. So we did Banks, Simmons, Loveland. Okay. What corners are here? Okay. So Jahdae Barron to Seattle, like that conversation needs to happen. Observe again, Barron is 58th on the draft board. Me picking him in round 1 once isn't going to move him all the way up. So in order for Barron to become a first round pick to to Seattle, more people would have to pick him. Now, Malachi Starks, definitely a true first round grade. And then you see Cam Ward and you see Sanders. Okay. So if I'm Seattle and Cam Ward is there, I'm taking him over Starks just based upon positional value as well as the upside of the player. So getting Cam Ward at like the 18th pick of the draft, I think would be the right value for both the team and the player. Okay, so we talked about Kelvin Banks, tackle from Texas, Josh Simmons, tackle from Ohio State, Colston Loveland, tight end from Michigan, Jahdae Barron, defensive back from Texas. He could play corner, could play safety, could play slot. So there's a lot of ways that you could use him. And then Cam Ward, the quarterback from Miami. Okay, so now we're going to do a first-round challenge for the next team in the draft order, and that is the Houston Texans. Okay, so for me, the Texans would probably consider wide receiver, considering that Tank Dell is probably going to miss the season opener, and that Stephon Diggs is a free agent. So wide receiver will be talked about here, as well as interior defensive line. So, and then I think tight end would get mentioned. So out of all of these players, Colston Loveland it's either going to be Colston Loveland or James Pierce here. As far as who probably grades out higher, I'm going to go Loveland as the first pick in this situation. And then Pierce or Harmon. I don't think Pierce is going to get too many true first-round grades. So I think that Harmon and Pierce are in the same tier. Because of the depth of the edge class, I'm going defensive line first. And then I saw another player that was going to have a true first-round grade. So is he still there? Or he's not there this time? Nope, he's not there this time. Okay, so another interior defensive lineman to mention here would be Kenneth Grant. Again, not likely a true first-round grade on Grant, but there's a lot of things you like. He's coming in with he's a high-floor defensive lineman. And now, again, at this situation, true first-round grade on Will Campbell. Probably going to play guard for the Texans. Okay, but I do like that pick. Now, if Ashton Genty falls, that's one of the players I'm looking for here. Did Genty fall? He did not. So I don't think Omarion Hampton at 19 is right, but that's not far off. Like, I thought about Hampton, but I do see Kelvin Banks, and I think offensive line help to the Texans makes sense. Okay, so those are my 5 first-round picks for the Texans. Those players were Colston Loveland, tight end from Michigan, Derek Harmon, defensive tackle from Oregon, Kenneth Grant, defensive lineman from Michigan. I would definitely pay attention when you look at a defensive line board, which player is higher. Some people have told me that they think Harmon's issues can be cleaned up easier, and he also has more upside. So they would have Harmon over Grant, but Grant is likely coming in with a higher floor. So you have to ask yourself, are you drafting for the floor or are you looking for the ceiling in your draft grades and your projections? And then we talked about Will Campbell from LSU and Kelvin Banks from Texas. Okay, so now we're going to the team that's 20th in the draft order. Okay, and that's the Denver Broncos. Okay, so if I'm thinking Denver, getting an impact player would be what's important here. Okay, so you can see I like what is sitting up here at the top. There's a good chance, yeah. So for Denver, I like Stewart over Pierce, so I'm going to go Stewart. Stewart from this is more of a bet on upside. Stewart has more traits as far as arm length, size that I think translate. And Mika Egbuka coming in at the 20th overall pick and getting some wide receiver help for Bo Nix makes sense to me. Okay. I like Scourton over Warren. And part of that is I would rather have the true first-round grade over the position of need, which is tight end. Okay. Alec Iomanor the wide receiver from Stanford, coming in the back half of round 1. Okay. Would Denver take Ashton Genty if he fell to pick 20? And, there's probably a debate. Okay, do you go with the impact player, like, at a rarer position? So it's tougher to find defensive linemen than running backs. But I am going to go with the grade and say Ashton Genty here. And feel free to flame me on social media, Broncos country. So the 5 players that I just talked about were Shamar Stewart from Texas A&M, the edge, Emeka Egbuka, the wide receiver from Ohio State, Nick Scourton, the other edge from Texas A&M, Alec Iomanner, wide receiver from Stanford, and Ashton Genty, the running back from Boise State. Okay, so we're going to the team that's 21st overall in the draft order, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Okay, so first round challenge is toggled on. Pick Tampa Bay. We're going to do 5 unique 1-round Tampa Bay drafts. So who should Tampa Bay consider in round 1? I'm immediately thinking wide receiver. But at the same time, there's probably going to be some edges here that we're going to like to talk about. So wide receivers in this range would be Alec Iomanner, wide receiver from Stanford. Emeka Egbuka from Ohio State. Okay, I'm going to go one more wide receiver here just to bring another name into the discussion. And that wide receiver is Xavier Restrepo from Miami, going in round 1. So seeing Restrepo in the back of round 1 shouldn't surprise you. I think his value is going to be closer to, let's say, player 33 through 50. But don't be surprised from a wide receiver standpoint. Restrepo is coming in with a really high floor. So I think any of these 3 wide receivers, so you can see the 3 receivers that I took up across the top, the simulator makes sure that they're taken before Tampa Bay's pick here. Okay, so who else would Tampa Bay? So if Nick Scourton's there, I definitely think, true first round grade, and you're getting them at like 21st overall pick. I think you're going to like that. And then would the Buccaneers do Ashton Genty? Again, true first round grade, or would they take a different player? And I'm going to actually do a Xavier Watts shout out. Well, they have Antoine Winfield, so I don't think they would do that. What's the linebacker like? If Jihad Campbell is available at pick 21, again, going with some people have Campbell as a true first round grade. So my opinion is you take him there. So the players that we talked about, Alec Iomanner, Emeka Egbuka, Xavier Restrepo, 3 different wide receivers. I don't think any of those 3 will be consensus first round grades. I think Scourton and Campbell will be first round grades on some boards, but not all. Okay. And then we're going to do first round challenge for the next team in the draft order. That is the Los Angeles Chargers. Okay. So the Chargers, to me, would be doing wide receiver, tight end, and then if edge falls, maybe, and then corner as well. So I like Egbuka to the Chargers. We would have to chart out, does a former Michigan coach draft an Ohio State wide receiver? We may have to track that. Seeing Kelvin Banks at pick 22, that's interesting from a value because this is a first round grade, so I'm going to take him. Right? So again, focusing on the grade, you'll probably kick him into guard. But that would definitely be, to me, a Jim Harbaugh pick. Colston Loveland, tight end from Michigan going to his former Michigan coach. I think that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so now we're looking at a board where there's not necessarily a lot of first-round grades here. I think Siobhan Ravel probably has a first-round grade. So if the Chargers need a corner, that pick seems to make a lot of sense there. And then, again, there's just a significant conversation of who sneaks into the back of round one. So Jihad Campbell coming into the back of round one, this is more of a pick of, I realize that they have Junior Colson, but you can move Campbell to edge. Campbell can do more than just play off-ball linebacker. I think from a grading standpoint, that looks right. Meaning, again, focus on the board. And the players we just talked about for the Chargers were Emeka Egbuka, wide receiver from Ohio State, Kelvin Banks, tackle from Texas, Colston Loveland, tight end from Michigan, Siobhan Ravel, corner from Eastern Carolina, and Jihad Campbell, the linebacker edge from Alabama. Okay, now we're going to go to the team that's next in the draft order. The LA Rams. Okay, so we covered this on a podcast last night, but the Rams, to me, from a draft standpoint, are a team that literally kicks butt. Like, got to give a lot of props to the Rams scouting department. So the Rams need a corner. The question would be which corners grade well enough to be in the back of the first. If Siobhan Ravel is there, that to me is like one of the picks that you rush up. He is injured, so he may not be available for training camp. So that's just something to keep in mind. Okay. Jahdae Barron, back around one. I could definitely see that. And Barron has some position flexibility, so he could play slot, he could play safety, he could also play boundary corner. Okay, other players. So has Sean McVay ever had a tight end like Tyler Warren? So Warren probably not going to be a true first-round grade, but he's probably going to be tight end 1 or tight end 2 on most boards. And then we see Colston Loveland. Okay, so I'm definitely going to go Colston Loveland here. And then I'm going to also check to see if Jihad Campbell. So Campbell right now is rising up boards. So I'm going to say Campbell to the Rams, getting them some linebacker and edge help. So that's for the Rams, Siobhan Ravel, corner from Eastern Carolina, Jahdae Barron, corner from Texas, Tyler Warren, tight end from Penn State, Colston Loveland, tight end from Michigan, and Jihad Campbell, linebacker edge from Alabama. Okay, and then the final team that we're doing in this podcast is 24th overall. Okay, 24th overall right now with the current draft orders, the Washington Commanders. This podcast is being recorded the Saturday before the NFL season ends. So if you see the draft order change, yeah, I'm aware of that. But at the same time, trying to show you kind of where players are graded as a lot of teams' season is about to end tomorrow. So definitely wanted to get this podcast out there so that people can see these are players you want to start listening to. And you can either say, okay, the podcaster's an idiot, Jihad Campbell should not go in round 1, or how come nobody else is talking about Jihad Campbell in round 1 yet? Okay, so for the Commanders, my opinion is the Commanders need an offensive tackle. And 24 to 44 is the sweet spot in this draft for tackles. So Simmons is likely going to be tackle 3 or tackle 4 on most boards. So I'm going to go Campbell as the first player to the Commanders. I know the Commanders missed on getting an offensive tackle last year. There's one more tackle I want to talk about. His name is Ariante Ursary. Okay, so I'm going to take Ursary to the Commanders in round 1. He's coming in at the back half of round one. I think these two tackles will be who the Commanders fans will be debating for the next 4 months. Simmons or Ursary. Okay. What other players would the Commanders consider? I think Emeka Egbuka, the wide receiver from Ohio State, coming in at the back half of round one. Again, not a true first-round grade on any of those three players, but players to talk about. If Loveland drops, I think that's a good pick for the Commanders. And I saw Siobhan Ravel there. So if he's still there and there isn't a higher graded player, yeah. So, okay. So he's not there. So what does the corner board look like? I'm going to go Jahdae Barron, late first to the Commanders. So the players we talked about for the Commanders were Josh Simmons, offensive tackle from Ohio State. Ariante Ursary, offensive tackle from Minnesota. Emeka Egbuka, wide receiver from Ohio State. Colston Loveland, tight end from Michigan. Jahdae Barron, corner from Texas. Okay. I see several people watching the podcast right now, so thank you very much. This channel has daily draft content on it. So already today we've had 4 podcasts. One covered offensive linemen, and then we did 3 mock draft podcasts like this. We will have draft content daily on the channel throughout draft season. So depending upon if you want to see like an offensive lineman big board or a wide receiver big board, or see a deep dive on wide receivers or a deep dive in any position, this channel has that content. So we look forward to seeing you on another podcast soon. Thank you very much for watching. On behalf of the 22 podcasters at the Draft Professor, my name is Jim. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you for watching this episode of the Mrs. R Relevant Daily Draft Podcast, brought to you by the Draft Professor. Please follow the Draft Professor on YouTube, X, and Twitter at NFL Draft Fanatic. No, I am Fanatic. If you have a moment, try using some of the Draft Professor mock draft functionality, including a first-round challenge, a second-round challenge, rank players, and draft a team. Thank you very much for watching, and we look forward to seeing you on our daily draft podcast tomorrow.